When a glance lingers too long, it's no longer just curiosity, it's desire waiting to be confessed. The first time I noticed something different, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of moment you read about in books or see in movies. It was simple, quiet, almost too quiet to matter. But it stayed with me. I was sitting at my friend's dining table, scrolling absently on my phone while he ran upstairs to grab something. His mom was in the kitchen, just a few steps away, moving around with the kind of ease that only comes from years of routine. She was making tea, steam curling from the kettle, the faint scent of mint drifting through the air. I should have looked away, gone back to my phone, but my eyes stayed on her. She wasn't trying to be graceful, yet everything she did carried a quiet elegance. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way her wrist bent as she poured the hot water into the mug. She wore a simple blouse, pale blue, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Nothing extravagant. But on her, it looked like something more, like confidence wrapped in fabric. When she noticed me watching, she didn't say anything. She just smiled faintly, one corner of her lips lifting as though she caught me in a thought I shouldn't have had. My chest tightened, and for a second, I felt like a kid again, embarrassed for no real reason. But then she spoke. "Tea?" she asked, her voice calm, melodic in the small kitchen space. I nodded, maybe too quickly, trying to act casual. She slid a cup across the counter toward me, the porcelain warm when my fingers brushed it. And maybe it was just in my head, but her hand lingered near mine a moment longer than necessary. The light from the window poured across her face, catching the faintest lines near her eyes, lines that didn't dull her beauty but deepened it, adding a kind of story to her expression. She was 40, maybe 41. I was 24. I shouldn't have been thinking about her the way I was. But I couldn't help it. That moment, with nothing more than tea and silence between us, felt heavier than it should have. Like we were standing on the edge of something neither of us had planned for. Something neither of us could name yet. When my friend came back downstairs, laughing about some silly delay, I forced my attention back to him. But inside, I knew. Something had shifted. And no matter how much I told myself to ignore it, I couldn't stop replaying the way her eyes lingered just a second too long. It was late one evening when it happened again. The house was quiet in that particular way only night can bring, when every sound seems sharper, every silence deeper. My friend had gone out, leaving me behind with the promise of returning soon. I wandered into the living room, not expecting anyone else to be awake. But she was there. She sat curled on the couch, legs tucked under her, a book resting loosely in her hands. The soft glow of a lamp lit her face in warm tones, making the whole room feel softer, slower. She wasn't dressed for company, just a loose cardigan over a simple tank top, her hair falling a little messy around her shoulders. And yet, she looked striking. Not because of effort, but because of presence. She glanced up, surprised to see me standing there. For a heartbeat, I thought of retreating, letting her have her solitude. But something about her expression stopped me, not annoyance, not discomfort, but something gentler. An openness, as if she didn't mind the intrusion. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice low, nearly blending with the quiet hum of the lamp. I shook my head, settling into the armchair across from her. "You?" She gave a faint smile, closing her book halfway. "Reading helps. Though sometimes I get lost in the words and forget why I picked it up in the first place." Our conversation was simple, ordinary, even. But beneath it was something heavier. The pauses between our sentences stretched, pulling us into silences that felt more meaningful than the words themselves. I found myself studying the way her lips curved when she smiled, the slight furrow between her brows when she grew thoughtful. At one point, I made a small observation about the book she held, a detail I had noticed from the cover. She looked at me then, longer than before, her eyes steady, almost searching. "You notice things," she said softly. "Things most people would overlook." Her tone wasn't casual. It carried weight, a kind of acknowledgement I wasn't used to receiving. My chest tightened, and I felt heat rise to my face, though I tried to mask it with a half-shrug. But her words stayed with me, more than they should have. Compliments usually fade quickly. This one didn't. It lingered, not just because of what she said, but because of how she said it, like it mattered to her that someone truly saw her. As I sat there, the quiet pressing gently around us, I realized something. The distance between us wasn't measured in years, but in unspoken thoughts. And little by little, those thoughts were finding their way into the open. The next time we spoke, it wasn't planned. I had stepped out onto the porch for some air, the night wrapped in a blanket of crickets and distant traffic. The door creaked behind me, and when I turned, she was there, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Couldn't sleep again?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I shook my head, offering a small smile. "Guess not." For a while, we just stood there, side by side, the wooden boards under our feet creaking with every shift of weight. She leaned against the railing, eyes turned toward the street lamp that flickered faintly at the end of the block. Her profile was calm, almost serene, but her silence felt heavier than usual. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a softness I hadn't heard before. "You know, sometimes I feel like no one really sees me anymore." The words hung in the cool night air, fragile and unguarded. She didn't look at me when she said them, as though speaking to the shadows instead. But I saw the way her hands tightened around the railing, the faint tremor in her breath. I hesitated, heart pounding, then said the only thing I could, "I see you. More than you know." That made her turn, her eyes locking onto mine with a kind of startled intensity. For a moment, I thought she might laugh it off or dismiss it. But she didn't. Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to respond, but no words came. Instead, she looked away, blinking rapidly, her composure slipping for the briefest second. The silence that followed was heavier than any conversation we'd had before. It wasn't awkward, it was charged, alive with something neither of us wanted to name. A clock chimed faintly inside the house, pulling her back. She straightened, smoothing her cardigan as if to erase the vulnerability she'd just shown. "It's late," she murmured, her tone steadier, almost rehearsed. "We should probably get some rest." I nodded, though my chest still buzzed with the echo of her confession, and my reply. She slipped back inside, leaving the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the night air, delicate and haunting. I stayed on the porch a while longer, staring at the flickering street lamp, knowing full well that something had shifted again. We had crossed an invisible line, one that could never be uncrossed. And even though we hadn't touched, the weight of her words, and mine, felt like the closest thing to a touch I'd ever known. It was a late night, the kind that feels heavier after a long day. I had gone with her to help carry in groceries, something simple, something ordinary. The driveway was dark except for the pale wash of the porch light, which flickered now and then, throwing shadows across the steps. We carried the bags inside, setting them down on the kitchen counter one by one. Neither of us spoke much, the silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't casual either. It was thick with something else, something we both pretended not to feel. When the last bag was placed on the counter, she let out a sharp exhale, her shoulders rising and falling as though she had been holding her breath the whole time. I turned toward her, about to ask if she was okay, but she beat me to it. Her voice was quiet but strained, as if every word cost her something. "I can't do this anymore." I frowned, confused. "Do what?" She pressed a hand to her forehead, then dropped it, meeting my eyes with a look so raw it made my chest tighten. "Pretend." Her lips trembled, and she shook her head as if frustrated with herself. Then, softer, barely more than a whisper, "I can't stop thinking about you." The words hit me harder than I could have prepared for. I froze, heart hammering so loudly I was sure she could hear it. For weeks, maybe longer, I had been pushing down the same thoughts, convincing myself it was just me, that whatever I felt was mine alone to carry. But here she was, standing in the dim light, voicing the very thing I had never dared to say. Her eyes flickered with fear the second the words left her mouth. As if she already regretted them, as if she wanted to take them back but couldn't. I saw her vulnerability then, the quiet battle between desire and restraint. "I shouldn't have said that," she muttered quickly, turning slightly away, gripping the edge of the counter like she needed it to steady herself. But I couldn't look away from her. The woman who always carried herself with confidence, who seemed untouchable, was suddenly trembling before me, not from weakness, but from honesty. The kitchen felt smaller, the air thicker. Every second stretched long, pulsing with unspoken questions. My throat tightened, but deep inside, I knew this was a moment that would change everything. Because once words like that are spoken, there's no going back. For a few long seconds, I couldn't move. Her words hung in the kitchen air, fragile yet unshakable, "I can't stop thinking about you." She stood there, shoulders stiff, eyes lowered to the counter as though ashamed of her own truth. I could almost see her bracing for rejection, preparing herself for me to laugh it off, or worse, to walk away. But I couldn't do either. My pulse roared in my ears. The weight of what she'd confessed pressed into me, demanding an answer. And though fear gripped me, something stronger rose inside, something honest. I stepped closer, careful, slow. She glanced up, startled, as though realizing how near I had come. Her breath hitched, her lips parting slightly, waiting. And then I said it. Quietly, but with every ounce of certainty I had, "Then don't stop at all." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. Her eyes widened, searching my face for hesitation, for regret. She wanted to find a reason to doubt me, I could see it. But there was none. I had spoken the truth. Her hand, resting on the counter, trembled slightly. Then, to my surprise, she let out a small, shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered, though her voice betrayed how much she wanted to believe me. I held her gaze. "I know exactly what I'm saying." She exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders loosening just enough to make her seem softer, younger, almost. She reached for one of the grocery bags still waiting to be unpacked, as if clinging to something ordinary, something safe. But when our hands brushed over the same carton of milk, neither of us pulled back. Her skin was warm against mine, her touch electric in its simplicity. It wasn't a bold embrace, not even a deliberate gesture, just two hands resting in the same space too long. But it felt like everything had shifted in that instant. The air around us grew heavier, thick with the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. She didn't move, and neither did I. The flickering porch light outside cast shifting shadows across her face, and for the first time, she didn't hide behind a wall of composure. We weren't pretending anymore. The truth was out. And for the first time, it felt like we were both standing on the same side of it. After that night in the kitchen, nothing felt the same. It wasn't as if the world outside had changed, dawn still came, routine still carried on, but between us, something invisible had shifted. Words once unspoken now lingered between every glance, every silence. Later that evening, we found ourselves alone again in the living room. The house was unusually quiet, my friend gone for the night. The TV played softly in the background, casting flickering light across the room, but neither of us cared for the noise. We sat there, a cushion of space between us on the couch, but the distance felt thinner than ever. She broke the silence first, her voice soft, careful. "This is dangerous, you know." I looked at her, and in her expression I saw more than fear, I saw conflict. She was weighing everything, the years between us, the unspoken rules, the judgment that would surely come. Her fingers twisted in the hem of her cardigan, a nervous gesture that betrayed her calm tone. "I know," I admitted. My voice felt heavier than I intended, carrying the truth I couldn't hide. "But pretending nothing's there, that feels worse." Her eyes flickered to mine then, wide and vulnerable. For a moment, neither of us moved. And then, slowly, carefully, she shifted closer. The space between us dissolved into a mere inch. My chest tightened at the sight of her so near, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Her hand rested gently on the couch, so close to mine it was almost unbearable not to bridge the gap. I took a breath, steadying myself, then let my fingers inch toward hers. The moment our hands touched, she froze, not pulling away, not giving in, just holding still as if the entire world had narrowed to that one point of contact. When she finally turned her palm upward and let our fingers intertwine, I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was such a simple thing, 2 hands laced together, but the weight of it was profound. Her thumb brushed lightly across my knuckles, a delicate, absent-minded gesture that felt more intimate than 1,000 words. She whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know if I'm brave enough for this." I tightened my hand around hers, steady but gentle. "You don't have to be brave alone." The TV's glow flickered across her face, highlighting the quiet storm of emotions in her eyes. And as we sat there in that fragile closeness, I realized something. It wasn't the risk that scared me anymore. It was the thought of letting her slip back into silence. The living room was wrapped in quiet, the kind of stillness that felt almost sacred. The TV played faintly in the background, but neither of us paid attention. We sat side by side, our hands still linked, as if letting go would undo everything we had just admitted. She leaned back slowly, her head finding its way to my shoulder. It was such a small motion, but to me, it felt monumental. The weight of her cheek against me was light, steady, grounding. I could feel the rhythm of her breathing, slow, uncertain at first, then calmer, steadier, as though she was letting herself rest in the choice she had just made. For a moment, I didn't dare move. I simply let the warmth of her presence wash over me, my heart beating in a rhythm I hoped she couldn't hear too loudly. Then, instinctively, I tilted my head just enough that my cheek brushed against her hair. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let out the quietest sigh, as if the world outside no longer existed. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered after a long silence, her voice soft, almost fragile. "It breaks every rule I've ever set for myself." I swallowed, choosing my words carefully. Maybe love isn't about rules. Maybe it's about what feels true, even if it's complicated. She was quiet again, but her fingers gave mine a gentle squeeze, a wordless agreement. It wasn't the kind of grand confession you see in movies. It wasn't loud or reckless. It was softer, deeper, 2 people admitting that they'd found something worth holding onto, even if no one else would understand. The clock ticked faintly in the background. Outside, the neighborhood was asleep, the street lamp standing guard in the still night. Inside, the only thing that mattered was the silence we shared, a silence that no longer felt heavy, but warm. I knew then that whatever happened tomorrow, or the day after, this moment would stay with me. The way she leaned against me, the way her hand fit into mine, the way her defenses melted just enough to let me see the part of her that longed to be seen. I didn't need promises. I didn't need forever spelled out. All I needed was the truth of now, the quiet certainty that, for tonight, she had chosen me. And as I closed my eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of her breath against my chest, I realized something I would never forget: sometimes love doesn't arrive in the ways you expect. Sometimes, it slips in quietly, like a confession under flickering light, and stays because you're brave enough to let it.